Hello and welcome to Global Armenians. Kay Mouradian, an author, joins us from South Pasadena. Kay, thanks for your time this afternoon.
Welcome.
We are talking to you about your new documentary, My Mother's Voice. Tell us about its screening at the Big Bear Film Festival recently.
Yes, it was screened last weekend at the Big Bear Film Festival, and I have to tell you, Paul, it was just a magnificent event. The program director apparently is an ex-Hollywood story editor. She knows lots of people in Hollywood, and there were many, many Hollywood personnel there who were giving seminars and film festivals, in addition to running 100 independent films. And it just went so fast from Friday through Sunday. It was really wonderful. My film, My Mother's Voice, which is the story of my mom and her survival from the Armenian Genocide and how she found her way to America to marry a man she knew only in a photograph, my dad, was received very, very heartwarmingly. So I was very, very pleased.
How long is the documentary, Kay?
We made the documentary for 25 minutes, primarily so it would fit into the history curriculum in all the social studies classes. And I've been trying to make inroads to get the film into the hands of history teachers, and I'm working in that direction at the moment.
This was based on your book, My Mother's Voice, original version, A Gift in the Sunlight. And when you wrote this, you had in mind using it in high schools because you have an educational doctorate and you worked in education for a long time. Is that true?
Yes, yes. You know, when I was teaching health education, Paul, there was one film that I used all the time for every single health class I had. And it was because that particular film told the story better than I could have talked about food and nutrition. And I wanted to develop a documentary that maybe teachers would use yearly, just because even though it's the story of my mother, it does tell the story of the genocide in totality. And those that have seen it seem to feel that that's what it does. You know, I want to tell you a little bit about my filmmaker. I wrote the script. I was the narrator and the co-producer, but my filmmaker, Mark Friedman, has a day job with Moriah Films. He's the sound designer, and Moriah Films is the film arm for the Simon Wiesenthal films. And interestingly enough, Mark in I think it was 1998, when he went to Armenia under USAID to help with designing and building a recording studio in Yerevan, and he lived there for 6 weeks. Now, it's interesting. Here's this Jewish fellow who has made documentaries about the Holocaust, who has actually lived in Armenia and understands the depth of the Armenian wound. And he just happens to be a friend of one of the fellows in my tennis club, and that's how we met. He read my book, saw my PowerPoint presentation, and said, if you get some funding, call me. Well, I was able to get some seed money from AGBU. I called him, and he started work the next day.
And now that you have the documentary and it's screened already, what will it take for this documentary and your book to get into the public schools?
Well, actually, it takes, there's a lot of bureaucratic movement that needs to be done in that area. And one of my projects was to contact the National Council of Social Studies, which is the major organization in the United States. And this last September, early this month in September, there was an announcement in their newsletter about my film, offering it as a donation to history teachers. And I've received a few requests for it, but nowhere near as many as I had anticipated. And practically every request I've had are from teachers who are already teaching about the Armenian Genocide. And my fear is that those teachers who are not contacting me are overlooking the Armenian Genocide in their curriculum of teaching in World War I. So hopefully I'm going to be able to make some inroads to break that down and and get the film to those teachers who normally do not teach about the Armenian Genocide. That's my objective.
Kay, briefly before we go, tell us about how you came to know your mother's story. It was late in her life, and you have a very interesting tale to tell about this wonderful dialogue that went on before your mother passed.
It's interesting, Paul, because I was never really interested in what happened in the Armenian Genocide. You know, my mom would tell me stories. They would go in one ear and right out the other. I just was not interested. But when she turned 83, she nearly died and survived and had five near-death experiences before she finally crossed over. And in one of those experiences, she said I was going to write a book about her life, and I immediately dismissed it because I was doing research with an MD, and the two of us were going to co-author a book, and I had been accepted in Beijing to study, to do some more research for the book. And interestingly enough, I never got to Beijing, and when I started to read about what happened in the Ottoman Empire in 1915, I became overwhelmed with the depth of cruelty that was inflicted on the Turkish Armenians. And that's when I knew that my mother's story needed to be told, because I wanted her to be the catalyst to tell the Armenian story. I wanted my mother and her family to represent every Armenian family who was supported at that time, and I feel that I've accomplished that feat. Yes. It was an interesting time.
And now there's a documentary that you can share and tell your mother's story and Armenians' story globally. Kay, tell us about your website. What's the address?
The address is www.kaymouradian.com. And I have a lot of information on there. And I did a great deal of research on Henry Morgenthau. He was really a magnificent human being. And I have, actually, when I started writing my mother's story, I started with Henry Morgenthau, and he kind of took the story over. And one day I said to myself, hey, this isn't Henry Morgenthau's story, this is my mother's story. But I have 10 chapters written about him that is on my website that I think many people will find an interesting read.
Fascinating project, Kay. Thank you very much for your time. Author Kay Mouradian joining us from South Pasadena.
Thank you very much, Paul.
All right, and thank you at home for joining us on CivilNet.
My pleasure. My pleasure.